Welcome. We are Lorna and Kurtis Hewson, hosts of the Building a Culture of Collaboration.
And I'm Jessica Lane, host of the Data and Education podcast. In today's bonus episode, we're talking systems and strategy with Dr. Melissa Wainwright, an MTSS consultant and coach who brings over 25 years of experience to her work helping schools take action with data. Melissa is passionate about moving beyond just collecting data to actually solving problems, like the district who used data visualization to uncover how attendance was secretly taking literacy. With a background in collective leadership and appreciative inquiry, she's all about leveraging data in a positive, people-centered way.
Intentional and purposeful focus on building a culture of collaboration is the secret for leaders striving to make a difference. In building a culture of collaboration, Kurtis and Lorna Hewson will share simple tips, ideas, and strategies to take your organization's collaborative efforts to the next level.
Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. It's so great to be here with you all.
And Melissa, we do have to let people know, if those that are listening, they're not going to be able to see the great background, but you're actually joining us from an Airbnb that had, was it a podcast space? Was that what was advertised?
It's a podcast space, and I'm actually in a space that is also this. It has 6 different makeup stations. It's meant to be a girl's getaway. And I'm here for my niece's 30th birthday in Denver.
So fun.
Yeah, it's very fun.
When they set up the podcast space, I bet they weren't thinking data and education would be the topics then that was going to be communicated through there.
The host is such a creative person. Every room is amazing. And this is one space just really colorful and fun to me.
That's fun.
That's so fun.
So, Melissa, I'd love for you to share just a little bit of your background as an educator and what's brought you to this point where you are today.
I was thinking about this and just thinking about this podcast. And when I started my education career, I was a bilingual educator, and we used data to see where our students were when they came in and then along the way. And that was quite a bit of time ago, where it wasn't talked about as much as using data to inform our decisions. And that just became interesting to me to see how my students were growing. From there, I went into administration and continued my data journey. And more recently, I use data in my work where I moved from regional to state, and just seeing the different places that the data tells a story. And when people not only uncover the reasons, the why, but they actually do something with it, change can happen. And it becomes a way that the culture changes in the system. And I'm fortunate to have had classroom, building level, district level, regional, and state level to just see the different dynamics of impact that when we use data, we can really move the organization, but most importantly, have an impact for positive change for our students. And one thing I'm really passionate about in the roles I've been in lately is just equipping the adults with what they need to be able to do what's needed for students. Mm-hmm. That's what excites me.
That happens to be what excites me as well. So we're on the same page there, probably why we connected so well. So you talked about seeing the data at lots of different levels, and a little bit about using it as a bilingual educator, which is really neat. Tell me a little bit more about that, about how you use data in that role.
As I said, it was quite some time ago, and students would come in from all over the world. And because I was living in Chicago at the time, and we would assess the students at the beginning, which would inform us about their different levels of exposure and understanding of the English language, and then use that to help put them into classes, help to provide, it wasn't called these terms at the time, but provide the intervention, instruction, and support that they needed. It was used to help their content level teachers to meet the needs of the students. And that was exciting to me because we saw the students evolve over time, and to gain confidence, to gain information about the English language. And that was just, I think that was, in looking back, that was my beginning of loving data, to see how when we would apply an instructional piece to students, they would respond. We could do more of that. And to see a student come from not knowing any of the English language to being fluent, and knowing that a part of their story was unfolded because we took the time to know them, not just as that assessment piece, but to know them as students and understand what was their background. So not just that one assessment, but what's their family background? What knowledge are they bringing with them? Data is no, it's certainly numbers, but it's also interacting with what's that student's background, what is their story, and what is it that those classroom teachers need to be able to help that student.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying there, Melissa, because you're basically talking what Lynn Sherratt and Michael Fullen talk about, putting faces on the data, that it's not just
I have that
numbers.
book.
Yeah.
Right here in the stack.
Oh, you do?
Yes, of course.
One of the greatest celebrations that came at our school was when we started to really begin utilizing a number of different literacy assessments to help guide our practices. But at the end of the year, we would use a simple strategy during the year of just color coding kids based on the strategies. And it wasn't about coding them or labeling them. It was just saying, okay, right now, based on the data, this kid is red. So what are we going to do? But at the end of the year, we would show pictures of kids who moved a color level. And then when we showed the 12 students or so that moved 2 color levels, that went from red to green and then yellow to blue. Oh, huge celebrations. Like there was tears in the room, not because they went from this color to this color, but because people knew the story behind them and what they had done to get that kind of success. Yeah, powerful. And we couldn't have done it without the data.
I love that. Go ahead, Lynn.
I was just thinking the color represented something visual for the people to realize. And then I love that you attach the faces to it because that face represents a person.
And before that, saying we went from 72% meeting benchmark to 75%. I mean, I'd get excited because you could see the trend line and growth, but nobody else really gets jazzed up because we did a 3% growth.
Well, and not impactful for teachers whose passion is to see growth for kids.
Yeah.
Right.
I do have a couple of follow-up questions that are not as relevant as the discussion that we just had. But you said that you were in Chicago. When did you move from Chicago to Kentucky?
Actually, there was a place in between Chicago to Chattanooga and then to Kentucky. Yes.
Got it. So where in Chicago? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, where in Chicago were you?
I was in Bensenville, Elmhurst area, which is a suburb of Chicago. And I was at Bensenville Elementary. A little shout out to my first principalship. That was a bilingual school in Chicago and just a great community of people.
Love it.
That seems to be the through line in most of our episodes is people have either taught music at some point in time or have made their way through Chicago. And Jessica seems to find the Chicago connection every time.
Yes, I don't know how it happens, but I don't know if you know this, Melissa, but I was in Chicago for most of my teaching experience. I grew up in Cincinnati, and then I went to Chicago to teach, and then came back here after I had my daughter. But so I don't know why, but it seems like so many of the people I connect with just happen to also have been in Chicago at some point.
Well, there is the saying of the Chicago connection, and it comes up a lot when I meet people.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Place.
It is.
That's awesome. Well, Melissa, you emphasize moving from data collection and problem identification to meaningful, solution-focused, actionable plans, which we completely agree with, that manipulation and understanding of data has to have a response to it. So, and that's all within that MTSS framework. So why can you share with us why that shift from identifying problems to taking effective action often is the biggest hurdle for schools?
Well, I would say I'm guessing that you've sat in a meeting where the data are shown and the problems are talked about. We talk about, oh yes, this is something that we need to address. And then we leave. And that is so frustrating. Yeah. And I would rather people take chunks of time and actually have an actionable step that they can apply something to the data than to have this meeting where they talk about data and nothing happens. So to me, that action step is crucial to the process. And then something that I find that's beautiful, when we get the action step, we begin to apply what we said we're going to do. There's some accountability of what are the adults going to do with what we've uncovered here. We've talked about it. Let's get to the why of what we're doing. The beauty is, what I find is when people then apply what they say they're going to do, most of the time they see positive shifts. Otherwise, come back, dig a little bit deeper, find out what is really what we need to address. When we address it, what I love about collective leadership is we can say, when we focus on this, look at what we can do together to maximize our strengths and to do what's needed for our students. That's what I love to see, is when there's actually an action that takes place. The adults do what they say they're going to do. We see the response for the students, and we can celebrate that success together.
Yeah, I think I was actually on Kurtis and Lorna's podcast when I talked about a very similar thing, and that if you're not intentional about coming up with some kind of action plan, then you're just losing all of the adults, and you're over assessing the students, which is no good as well. But 100% that celebration is what then motivates them to continue using that data and continue making those moves that are going to help their students, which is really neat.
And the one that we often see in a multi-tiered system of support or RTI, whatever that looks like, is where people will look at the data and go, oh, that's a tier 2 kid, that's a tier 3 kid, and they tier their kids, and then they
walk away.
Good. Now what are we going to do? Well, tiering the kids is not the point. Let's determine, okay, based on that, now how do we respond?
It is about the action that follows. And actually, that conversation that you just described, Melissa, about us looking at the data and then walking away without actionable steps is really quite disengaging and harming for the professionals that are around the table, because they're just looking and walking away with, well, that's where we are, which is,
Right. Something that I love to do when I'm talking about tiers is, instead of saying students in tier 2 or students in tier 3, students in need of tier 2 supports or students in need of tier 3 support, so that it immediately triggers that, oh, this is something that is actionable. Like, we are doing something with this.
We'll actually, just because it relates to this conversation, we'll throw into the show notes. Lorna has a free webinar that's titled Stop Tiering Kids, Start Tiering the Supports. And it totally transforms the conversation.
Love that.
And that intentionality of language really is able to make some shifts in the process. And I encourage teams to find a protocol that they're going to use, a way that they're going to address that data set, and that gives a process to it. And I think in that teaming structure, having people on the team that really understand the data process, that you begin to have that culture of, in this time, in this meeting, we do create actions, we do propose solutions to our issues, and this space isn't solely to find the problems. And I think there's so much power in solution finding and celebrating small wins and large celebrations.
So, Melissa,
yes, absolutely.
I was intrigued when Jessica read in the introduction about an experience you had to uncover the link between literacy data and attendance concerns. Can you share a little bit more? I was very intrigued when Jessica mentioned that. We'll be right back to continue this episode.
Looking for practical strategies to use data effectively? Imagine classrooms where learning is personalized, student success is driven by insights, and school culture thrives on informed decisions. Join us for Data in Education, a virtual summit on June 10th and 11th. Discover new strategies from fellow educators and experts on data visualization, data culture, and data literacy. Learn how to create actionable dashboards, foster a positive data-informed culture, and use data to track, and celebrate student growth. We are also super excited that Kurtis will be the keynote speaker for this event. This virtual summit is for educators, school leaders, and anyone else who wants to increase their impact on student success. Don't miss this opportunity to learn and collaborate with educators from all over. Register now at bit.ly/Data Summit 2025.
And now back to our conversation.
I love telling this story because one, it's an actual event that happened, and it was from a team that really developed. They needed to develop, and so they had to get the right people at the table. And I'll try to be succinct with it. As they learned to be a team and they really uncovered their why as a group, they began to bring data to the table. They learned to bring it in a visual format, because initially we were bringing spreadsheets and charts and looking and kind of spending time that wasn't efficient, until they realized we need the right people at the table who can bring that. So that was kind of the beginning of the process. Then as they were looking, they realized our K-1 students in particular are underperforming in literacy, not meeting benchmarks. Initially, it was, we need to have more professional learning. We need to look at our resources. Maybe it's our scheduling. A lot of focus on the literacy aspect, which I'm not going to say that wasn't a needed part. However, because we began to use academic behavior, social emotional data, they began to layer it, and they realized this group of students, this is what their attendance are saying. And the attendance was saying a majority of our students are not coming in until midway through the literacy block. Mm-hmm. And they're not even getting a chance to have themselves in the seat to have the literacy instruction. And some weren't even there. So there was also this fully not being in school at all. And they needed to address the attendance in order to have the students in receiving the instruction, to even know if the students are responding to it. Such an aha for the school. And then realizing that there were other places where were we looking to see at the different demographics of our students. And then how do we support the students with what is the hurdle for getting to school in order to have our literacy block?
That is such a powerful example that without the data, we could have spent a lot of time and resources becoming master literacy teachers, and yet there's only 12 of 24 students sitting in front to receive that.
Yes. And I will say, as they began to address the attendance and the students were receiving the instruction, they began to see students making gains and meeting benchmarks with their literacy skills. And to that point, I want to say it wasn't a switch microwave solution. It did have to take place over time. They were able to uncover what was the root of the issue, and that was, we can't even tell if our students are responding to literacy instruction because they're not always here.
They're not here.
Yeah. I have a similar type story as well, where in a school, it was, our kids are always, high school, are showing up late all the time. And when they said, well, let's look at the data on this, they realized, no, that's not actually true. But if you look, we have a large misrepresentation of grade 11 students who are, and it's happening right after lunch. And here's the component who are. And then when they started to dig deeper, they realized, okay, we know the exact cause of this and what's happening and how we can solve this, because the data helped them narrow in. Otherwise, they would have been doing blanket policies on, late slips and other probably punitive measures. The principal had said if they hadn't narrowed it right down to the root causes, and it wouldn't have happened without having that data available.
And think about the impact that has for the 11th grade students, these K-1 students, because there was time spent to find out what's really behind it. And to the point of attendance, there were some real issues in that community that were able to be addressed, because there were some reasons behind why students weren't attending at that time.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And And again, it's all about asking why, getting down to that root cause. And sometimes it takes a little bit of digging, but it's so worth it in the end when you find out that's making such an impact, even though, like you said, sometimes it's a process. Sometimes it takes several years to get that all figured out. But it's so worth it.
Jess?
And yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, before you jump to a question, I'd love a follow-up as well from what
go for it.
There. Melissa, when you said we were coming in before with spreadsheets and what I assume was just raw data coming out, we helped visualize it. Can you describe a little bit more of, for someone listening or watching, to understand what you did specifically to help visualize the data? Because I sometimes think this is a stumbling block that people bring reams of data in and then they spend a large portion of time trying to figure out what it's saying.
Yes.
That is inefficient, like you said.
And it was moving around the spreadsheet over. It just was not good. That was developing, I did not do it, but developing a data dashboard for them and getting them to have it in visual format. And then my part as the coach was really meeting with a few key people prior to the meeting itself to help with some coaching sessions to get the data pulled together to say, what is it we want to see? What do we need? What are we lacking? What are we maybe over representing? And so they created a visual dashboard to have with the attendance, behavior, social, emotional data that they needed, so that it was in a visual format that they could come to the table to actually have a discussion about the findings, as opposed to spending time mulling over the raw information. Kind of to your point of the color coding of we could respond to the colors. Yes, they do represent students, they represent stories, but we need to be able in our meetings to be able to have it in a visual format, to be able to consume it. I liken it to, if I'm having people over for dinner, I don't wait till they arrive to go to the grocery store to get food. I know what I'm having. I have it ready, and we're going to be able to spend our time at the table talking together and sharing the meal, as opposed to, oh wait, I've got to go pull the stuff from the pantry and run to the grocery store and get what I need.
I love that idea of that analogy. That's so
I'm writing it down now.
It will be stolen for sure.
Have at it. Let's get people to understand what we're talking about.
That's right.
Right. Absolutely. And so, I've told you this before. I'm a huge believer in MTSS. And, one of my favorite stories to tell is the story of how we helped North College Hill, the school that I was at, the district that I was in for the past several years, pull the elementary school out of improvement process. And it was a slow rollout. It was a very a long process, but it's a process that I stand by, and I think that without the couple years of learning about MTSS before we even started to roll it out, it wouldn't have been done. So I'm a huge believer, and so I want to talk a little bit about that and about how school leaders can build that sustainable collaborative system for all that data-informed decision-making within the MTSS framework. And then what other leadership practices and structures most impact the effective data and action within those schools and districts.
Well, Jessica, that's a lot to unpack there. We'll take that question. It's a real, I think, for leaders, if we're going to specifically talk to leaders who are facilitating the process, I think first, we're not meant to do this alone. I think it's meant to understand what we're creating, and then building that team of people with shared experiences, shared expertise, to have a teaming structure. I know that I don't have all the skills I need to create a whole continuous cycle of improvement without having other people at the table who have different expertise, different experiences, different ways to see something, because I may see it from one perspective and there's someone else who has a rich idea that they bring to the table. So I think for leaders, realizing we don't have to do it alone, get your team together, spend time on your vision, your purpose, your why, understanding your school community. I think there's a desire to get things done quickly, but sometimes, I think most times, laying that really strong foundation will actually get you further and faster than trying to rush in and make things happen that people aren't yet ready for. And when I say the school community, I mean the educators, the families, the students, the larger community in which that school is situated. I think taking time to understand what we're doing is critical, getting people at the right place. And then I believe in, on that team, having some people with rich data understanding to be able to help that data literacy expand within the school. And while I say a team, having that school-wide MTSS team, that is a two-way, multi-way communication system. Not that they're the end-all be-all, but how's that a linked teaming structure that links to my PLCs, that links to my student intervention team, so that we are collectively working together. So to the leaders, I would say, don't try to do it alone.
No.
Yeah.
My first principalship where I got involved in academic and behavioral response to intervention, it was pretty new, and I was a part of a pilot project. I had 2 coaches from the University of Louisville, and they really taught me the value of teams, and that having a coach, having someone to come alongside you is really super helpful. And that would be one of my biggest things. Get involved with a team and a coach.
Yes, and I will second that, because part of the reason that it was so successful in that elementary school is because the instructional coaches, one at some points it was one, some points it was 2, worked so well with the principals there, and the principals could delegate some of that to them, and they had that perspective too of a little bit more of the instructional leadership, because at the time our principals, and we know this story, sometimes they get sucked into the operations, the behaviors, and that was kind of where we were. So it was a way to kind of bridge that gap and begin working together on more of the instructional pieces, and then as well as branching out into the behavior, the SEL, the attendance. So,
Melissa, you are speaking our language. As you're talking, we're just thinking, we absolutely, a good part of our work is about how we set up structures that are collaborative and connected, so that
highly aligned.
Yeah, so that we can have that examination of data, and then it impacts all of our school all the way across, and that it is the teams that really take us to those actionable steps around the data.
And I think I heard that word aligned, that they're aligned.
Yeah.
I think that is important. And I didn't say this. I also encourage people that as they're building their team, in that facilitator role and in the data role, there are certain roles of the process, to have somebody that's a co-leader with you, because one of the things that we know about education is that there's change, that there may be somebody who takes a new position, that they have to be out for a leave or whatever it might be. If I have a co-facilitator with me, we can just keep moving right along, and we don't have to lose momentum. So having somebody that's really aware of the logistics of what's happening and part of the planning and coming along to be a part of the process is very important.
This is one of the keys for us too, of not coming into a meeting and as a leader feeling I have to be responsible for every aspect of this conversation. We talk about distributing roles in that meeting, that, okay, who's facilitator? And I love your idea of who's co-facilitator. But that person should not be our recorder. Who's taking our notes? That should be someone else. Let's assign someone else who's going to be our timekeeper to keep us on track. And through that, we find that we just keep distributing leadership and ownership, so that the meeting success or failure is not up to one person, it's collective.
Well, and creating that process where everyone is contributing to the ideas and the discussion and the actions that arise from that, rather than depending on the one person who is facilitating or leading.
And like you say, when that one person is not there, oh, well, then it all
Everything
falls apart.
And it builds the response, that collective responsibility of the group, the collective ownership, and the meeting can go on. We want everyone is important and valued, but we want it to be system and structure dependent, not person dependent.
Yeah,
100%. I would love to hear, and we've teased at it at different points here, Melissa, but if you had to select 3 things for leaders to walk away with, what would you say are the 3 things that you think have the most significant impact for ensuring that data is being used for, as you said, used for action? We'll be right back to continue this episode.
Are you frustrated by the constant need for higher levels of support for your students? Are your resources stretched thin as more and more students are identified as requiring those intensive supports? Over the past number of years, with the growth of tiered response systems in schools, educational organizations have become proficient at tiering students for intensifying levels of support. However, I would suggest that we stop tiering our students. Tier how adults support those students instead. My name is Lorna Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. In this free webinar, I'm going to be sharing 5 considerations when developing a continuum of supports that tiers the supports, not the students. Throughout this webinar, I will share resources and samples to support your work back in your school. So excited to have you join me to learn more about shifting away from tiering our students to creating a continuum of supports that articulates how adults in the building can ensure all students' needs are met.
And now back to our conversation.
Hopefully I can stick with 3.
Hard to narrow it down. It's
Stick with 3. I think having that culture of data literacy, data ownership, that is data understanding, that's very important, that it is the leader that understands it. But system-wide, there's an understanding of in this school, in this place, we use our data to inform our decisions, to make action. So I'll say, I'm going to count that as 1.
Okay.
I would say utilize your data within a teaming structure, that it's not a one-person job. I think the other, which is probably a part of 1, but I find the data visualization as so crucial to the process that it's in a consumable way.
You know what's funny is that you kind of just said data literacy, data visualization, and data culture, which are my 3 domains. So
I was thinking that, Jessica.
Love it.
I think too, from what you're saying, I mean, you could have someone listening or watching this that going, okay, I have to go and start building up some capacities of my team before we ever start looking at data. And we would say, no, like start where you're at.
Right.
Start utilizing the data, start having conversations. We found within our own school that, you know, a year later, people were having conversations that were so deep, they could see things in the data that they couldn't see before, that they would be able to say, all right, when we take a look at our yellow students based on our color coding, we're noticing this trend for these halves. So let's set a goal that'll allow us to say that we're going to shrink this number from 22 down to 10 by the end of the term. Like, it got really specific, but it did not look like that when we started.
And rather than based on assumptions, it's based on what we actually know from our data.
I think that's a really good point. And owning whatever is uncovered is, it is what it is. So this is where we are. It's not a blaming. It's a, here's where we are, and what might we do as together to solve this, whatever we've uncovered. And so I think it's not about blaming. It's about, yes, we own it, and we're not trying to make excuses for whatever it is, but we're going to work together to create a solution.
We had another one of our guests on this podcast that Emily that had shared bad data does not mean you're a bad teacher. And I thought that was a really simple but powerful way to state exactly that.
When I work with leaders, sometimes we'll talk through the idea that you're opening a can of worms. Yes. And sometimes you have to face the reality of what the data is saying, but it is about, okay, so what comes next? What is our response, and how do we move forward from the point at which we are right now?
Yeah, and it's so important to be intentional about how you show that data and how you present it in a way that actually makes the teachers feel like you're building that trust and those relationships. And I think so often, and I've said this before, we go in trying to like pretend like they aren't going to be defensive or they aren't going to feel some sort of shame or sadness when they see it. And it's like, you need to be honest with yourself. Like that's what's going to happen. And what can you do to prepare for that?
And not using it as a weapon of sorts as a leader. And I think being mindful of where's the place for this particular data set, who's the audience that's going to process that. And there are places where the name of the person doesn't need to be identified on that data. I think really being mindful, going back to what does a leader need to do, being mindful of and cautious of what data are we using in what place.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, Melissa, this has been fantastic. We really appreciate your insights. And Jess, I don't know if this has been the same for you, but now that we've had some of these conversations with different leaders, it's awesome to hear some of the familiar themes coming out from people that are doing amazing work with data in schools. Yes, absolutely. I agree. It's so funny to hear all the similarities and all the stories that back it up too. It's interesting to hear because, there are things that I know that have worked with me and my past district and the schools that I've worked with. But then to hear other people saying the same things is just, it's so cool to hear. Yeah. So Melissa, before we ask how people can best get a hold of you if they want to connect or learn more, we do know that you will be presenting at the Data in Education Virtual Summit. Jess, when does Melissa's session happen? Yeah, so she'll be presenting on turning data into action, practical strategies for MTSS success, which I am so excited about. And that is on our second day, June 11th at 9 a.m. Eastern.
Excellent.
We can't wait to have you
hear. Yeah, what you have to say.
So Melissa, what would be the best way for people to get a hold of you if they wanted to learn more or to dig a little deeper into what you shared today?
melissa.wainwright.org or info@melissa.wainwright.org. So melissawainwright.org is perfect.
Awesome. Great. And we'll make sure we include that in show notes as well.
It's been really fun to talk to you all. And I too love talking to people that are doing this work and seeing positive change happen. And people often ask, does MTSS work? The process works when we do the process.
Yeah,
exactly. When we're committed to it, it will work. I agree. And it's been so nice having you on here. And I will say too that I'm going to continue to share out school stories on my podcast, the Data and Education podcast, because I think it's so valuable to hear all of those stories from the educators as well as from the specialists. And it gives me the good kind of chills. I love it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Melissa. Now, please enjoy the rest of your time with your family as well.
Thank you.
Yes, have fun.
Thanks so much, Melissa.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so as we were listening, I saw all of us, our heads go down to write down the, when you have guests over for supper, you don't wait for them to arrive to go buy your groceries and that was a great way. We talk about that all the time if you're coming into a room with raw data, that's on you as a leader. That should not be happening. Come ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I do my data visualization for educators program, so that I can make sure that there are more people out there who know how to prepare that data in a way that's actually easy to read, because you're right, it's so much time gets lost in the picking apart and the sorting, and there are some people that won't even go that far because they see that sheet of numbers and it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
I don't know
It's
what
a
I'm doing with
block already.
this.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. The other
Yeah.
thing that I loved that she was talking about was that you're not ever going to come away with a microwave solution,
Yeah.
which is just
Yes.
that quick fix, the fast,
Right.
the fast meal that you're going to get. No, it takes time for us to
It
be able to
does.
examine the data, determine a response, being able to put things into action, and then again reviewing what has happened because of those actions.
I'm at the Data and Education Summit, Jess. The one breakout session that I'll do is about 5 mistakes I see leaders make, and it's easy to identify because I've made all of them myself.
Yep, same.
Yeah, when getting data ready for teams to utilize, like there are mistakes that we make,
Yeah.
and then it happens exactly like Melissa was saying, that the time's not used efficiently or effectively. We talk about the value of color coding your data. Almost every time I've ever come into a space where the data had not been prepared, usually the first thing I see teachers do is somebody has a pencil case where they've got highlighters, and out come the highlighters. It's
Yep.
almost
Which
always
makes
the
sense.
first thing.
It's a logical step
Yeah.
in working through that data.
Right, absolutely. And I just had to give another quick shout out that when we asked her for 3 steps leaders can take, her
Yeah.
3 steps centered around data literacy,
Yeah.
data culture, and data visualization, which just again reminds me that I'm doing the right thing, which is really really awesome to hear.
Yeah.
And I just go back to like, through all these podcast episodes, being able to hear the successes that people have had by being intentional about using data is just, I love it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when you talk about those 3, because I do think there's a sequence, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Jess, where if we start on the data visualization, that's one thing that we can do without the rest of the team necessarily needing to be at a similar place. But I think without the data visualization, it's hard to start developing data literacy. And then as we're developing that literacy and getting better at our visualization, we're building out that culture for us as well.
Yeah.
Would you see that as we go from visualization to building upon the literacy, and through all of that, we're creating
building
that data
that culture?
Yeah, I think a lot of it happens at the same time. I do often say, though, that I wouldn't go as far as to invest in a full system or like a full dashboard or anything like that. There are easy ways that you can visualize just using Google Sheets or Excel that help along the way, but you don't really know what you need until you know what you need.
Yeah.
And so it's important to start building those systems, that literacy with some of those smaller visualizations that you have, that are free and easy, and then continue to build those as your team gets more and more comfortable with using data.
We talk about that all the time in our work, is start simple. You can always move to complex over time as you gain understanding. But if you try and start at complex, you're probably going to frustrate a lot of people and not have the results you want. Start simple.
Well,
real
and
simple.
You move to those more complex tools when you're ready for it and you find a need for it. And so many other ways that you can manage that to begin. Get started. Yeah.
All right. Well, this is so exciting to hear Melissa. And once again, that's on day 2 that she's sharing out her breakout session.
Yep, she'll be on day 2 at 9 a.m. Eastern time, and then she'll be talking all about MTSS. So there are a few sessions that are centered around MTSS, and she's one of them. So
excellent, and I'm going to be speaking very much to that during the keynote on that day too. So it's going to be a great lead-in for those follow-up conversations. All right. Well, this has been another successful 7 speakers in 7 days episode. Super excited to be able to share this out with listeners and viewers, and very much looking forward to our Data and Education Summit happening June 10th and 11th.
Me too. Thank you so much.
See you soon, everyone. Take care.
See ya.
Jigsaw Learning, founded by Kurtis and Lorna Hewson, is a team of educators who work with schools, districts, and educational leaders to establish collaborative response to ensure success for all students. Because every child deserves a team.